Dr. Naidoo, what a pleasure to interview you today and to talk to you. I'm so excited about our conversation. This is such an important conversation to have around nutritional psychiatry. So people have heard your bio, but I'd love you to just tell us a bit more about yourself and tell us something that's not in your bio and tell us why nutritional psychiatry. I just love it so much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Dr. Lee, for hosting me. I was looking forward to this conversation very much and a big fan and admirer of your work.
Thank you.
Nutritional psychiatry is really the use of healthy whole foods to improve what I call mental fitness. So it's really our mental well-being, our emotional selves. And it turns out that because of the government, and that's really emerging research in the last 2 decades, that we understand that these two organs are connected and that there are very positive ways in which they can affect our emotional well-being. And that's really how I define nutritional psychiatry. It's really not about eating 10 blueberries or taking 10 milligrams of Prozac. It's really about finding the personalized nutritional psychiatry plan that suits you the best. And one thing that people don't know about me that's not in the book is that although I came from a family of many, many physicians, allopathic and a few Ayurvedic, I wanted to be an astronaut at the age of 5.
I love it.
I was fascinated by space. And, my parents were very encouraging. They were like, well, of course, I'm not quite sure what they thought in Durban, South Africa, how I would quite be an astronaut, but they encouraged me. But I think that also just being surrounded by that element of science and health and nutrition, love and family, and playing doctor with my uncles who are medical residents and things like that. I think I somehow got influenced into the medical field. So
that's amazing. You come from a whole family of physicians. That's absolutely beautiful. But now we have something else in common, and that's we come from the same part of the world. So you're also South African. You were born in South Africa?
I was born in Durban in South Africa, and I moved to the US to study. Yeah.
Durban is so beautiful. We used to have a house on the South Coast, and we used to spend like half the year, about a quarter of the year there every year. And it's so beautiful, such a beautiful part of the world.
It's an absolutely beautiful part of the world, and I would encourage people to visit if they haven't. That in Cape Town, yeah.
Oh, yes. I studied in Cape Town, spent lots of time in Durban, beautiful country. But now you've been here in the States for a long time, haven't you? How many years is it now?
I have. I've lost count, but let me put it this way. I've been here longer than I did spend growing up.
So
South Africa, and I recently, it's funny, you lose track of that, and I think like yourself, there were just such amazing opportunities for me, and my parents were very encouraging of that, and I was fortunate. So.
Oh, that's one. Are you the only one here, or is your family here as well?
Yes. So I have distant relatives here, but my immediate siblings are between London and South Africa.
That's wonderful.
So my mom is still in Durban, so. Yeah.
That's like me. I have my family are all still in South Africa. I'm the only one here. So we have to go and visit and they come and visit us. But that's so exciting that we have the same sort of history, which is lovely and exciting. Now, I know that you have brought out a beautiful new book. This is Your Brain on Food. I love it. It's fantastic and such an important concept and such an important topic. So I'd love to dive into this. But before we do, I wanted to just ask you, conversations, you and I've had this conversation before and I have it so often. And one of the things that, I say a lot of, and I know you have the same philosophy, is that we don't want to label people and lock them in. And the narrative of the last 40 years, which you and I have seen in the trajectory of our career, we went from looking at the whole person context to looking at the brain, and everything's brain. And even though the advances are phenomenal, this concept of clinical neuroscience is very frightening because it's led to things like the DSM and it's led to labeling and boxing people in. I'd love you just to talk to that because you explain it so beautifully as well.
Even though I'm a practicing prescribing psychiatrist, I think that what nutritional psychiatry has offered me is the opportunity to share something that I bring with me from my cultural heritage, which is a holistic, integrated, and functional approach. So I'm always looking for an underlying cause. And I have an issue with DSM-5, even though I am a prescriber, because it really does not cover individuals. It does not cover many people whom I see. It's not a checkbox. It shouldn't be a list. And many people have emotions that are mixed with certain symptoms that, you rather than add a label to it, which is related to a diagnosis code, which is related to insurance billing, why not actually speak to the person? And that is what my work is about. It's obtaining a history, but then finding out what are ways that we we can help you feel better. So as I've said a few times to others I've spoken to, Dr. Leaf, whether someone comes in to talk to me and has a carnivore diet or a vegan diet, my role is not what I eat. It's really how to help you with what you're eating for your improved mental fitness. And there can be a variety of things. And sometimes what we find with careful exploration and testing, that someone has radically changed their diet for a different reason. And they have developed symptoms of, say, feeling very jittery and feeling very anxious. And rather than taking a medication, they'll speak to me. And with careful counseling and work around this, we can really walk them better to a better nutrition plan that they're eating and improve how they're feeling emotionally. And that's happened more than once. So not everyone needs a medication, but that at the same time, I know that we're responsible as well as clinicians and scientists. If someone is taking a medication, my message is not stop your medication and do something else. It's work with your physician to decide. But food is a tool at the end of our fork right now today that we can make a decision about. And it's powerful because it's within our control.
I love that so much. I love the fact that, we're eating anyway, and the food is so powerful. It's as powerful as a medication in a different way if it's used correctly. So it's so important that we do embrace a holistic approach. And I think that's what's been missing from this this 40-year-old narrative, is moving away from, the science is a bit neuroreductionistic. So I love your approach, and I love how you deal with the fact that, and your book, This Is Your Brain on Food, is fantastic because you really break down all the different areas. So there's 11 chapters, and I thought the best way to handle this is first let's discuss why you wrote the book, and then let's talk about some of the details in the book, because I've got so many questions I'd love to ask you that I think will help the audience.
Sure. So I really wrote the book because the nexus of the different things that I do, I really followed. I was always encouraged to study things that I loved, and I knew that I loved psychiatry, but I felt there was a gap, and that gap was there was no thought about mindfulness, about other ways to feel better. Everything seemed to be, Dr. Leaf, at the end of a prescription pad. It seemed to be the power of the prescription pad. And I didn't like that. I felt it was incomplete. So I began exploring. I wanted to learn more about nutrition. I know that we don't learn enough in medical school. My trip to culinary school, that was that was ode to Julia Child, who was my food hero.
Oh, I love it.
And I learned that she
one of my favorite. Yeah, I agree with you.
Exactly. I decided, well, why not me? And part of it was when I was early days studying in Boston, it was quite lonely. Yeah. Couldn't afford cable TV, so I had public television. She was on, and she would drop the omelet, and she would do all these. She'd have the big fish, and she'd be doing all these things, and it gave me confidence. It gave me confidence as a young cook and someone who had moved far away from their family. And so I decided that when I figured, she studied this as her second career, why can't I do it? And I was very fortunate, I was very blessed actually that it came together in the way that it did in nutrition and mental health and nutritional psychiatry. So the purpose of writing the book was that I was interviewed for an article, spoke to a reporter, and it was for a weekend edition of the Wall Street Journal back in 2018. And unbeknownst to me, the article went viral. And then agents and publishers reached out to me and said, well, you should be writing a book. And I really didn't realize that. I had been doing the work, and I had started the clinic, and I had been seeing patients. So that was how the book came to be.
I love that.
I felt, one of the things I felt, and I know you're a many-time best-selling author, was that for the first time, I realized a book was a way of sharing a larger message with more people. And I hadn't realized that. I'd always only been sort of in a hospital setting or private practice and working with an individual one-to-one. But it really opened my eyes up to how many more people can really take the education from it, or even just learn something new about food, learn something new about fortifying their mental well-being, through the use of food, but also through other things like how you sleep is equally important. How you eat for immune system is important. It's all of these things together. It's not just one single thing. So
I love that. I love that whole history there. That's wonderful. Second career, Julia Child, and then also to get into the fact that nutrition, it was something we do every day. It's so vital. And I love what you said, that as you say at med school, you don't learn about nutrition. And I've trained thousands and thousands of physicians in mind. And those are the two areas that are vital, and you've brought them together, which is so beautiful. So the book is This Is Your Brain on Food. food. And let's now dive into some of the chapters, because you really break it down very, very well. And this is like one of those books that you just, you keep. You don't give it away. You get it because there's, it's one of the, it's got lots of really excellent information. You've got some tables in here, and you've also got some recipes and that kind of stuff. So it's a super easy book to actually work through. So let's talk about the gut-brain romance. And I know that's been a sort of, it's 2 decades or so now. And I remember when I first started, it was, wow, is there even any relationship between them, and how important the enteric nervous system is. I mean, people don't even realize that your gut has as many neurons as your spinal cord. I mean, this is a real conversation that's going on between our brain and our gut. So could you talk just a little about that? Because I know so many, and I've interviewed lots of people about the gut brain, and I love your approach. And I think it's so important for people to understand in terms of mental health. So if you wouldn't mind just expanding a little bit about the gut brain romance.
I think it's helpful. Absolutely. Dr. Leaf, I think it's important for people to understand that for exactly the reasons that you shared. Many physicians, many scientists who've been studying something that was taught. And what we understand is that the gut and brain arise from the exact same cells in the body. So in the developing embryo, they arise from neural crest cells. And so they are inextricably connected embryologically, but then anatomically. The vagus nerve runs from the 10th cranial nerve runs from the gut to the brain to the gut. And it's called the wandering nerve in the body. And I like to call it, for want of a better word or a phrase, a two-way superhighway, because it's always sending chemical messages 24 hours a day, 7 days a week between these two organs, which is where food becomes so vitally important. Because as food gets digested, we can either those food products that are digested, we can either feed the bad bugs in the gut with junk food and fast food and added sugars and refined sugars, or we can feed the good microbes in the gut, which then help us thrive, help our immunity, help our hormone balance, help everything, but also our mental health. So that's important for us to understand. And then I also like to share with people that they know of medications like Prozac and Zoloft, which are called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, but more than 95% of the receptors are in the gut. So it's just helpful for people to understand that. And then right now, it's so important for us to know that about 70% of our immune system is in the gut. So it's just such a massive organ that, I like them to understand that there's about 29 trillion microbes in there, different kinds. And if you were to put them together, they would look like a small avocado, but they're all over within the system. And the lining of the gut is a single cell layer thin. So it can easily be damaged. It's a single cell layer thin, and they have these tight junctions that hold these cells together. So when you just damage it by eating poorly, and all of us can up our food game and eat a little healthier, but when we on that fast food diet with the junk foods and processed foods that are not best for us, they're not best for us because they do damage our mental health. And one of the ways they do it is through the impact they have on the gut-brain axis by causing inflammation and setting that up. And then people have leaky gut and other conditions that arise.
So it's not just the fact that it's 90 up to 95% of serotonin is produced in the gut, 70% of the immune system. I mean, it's the brain immune system is connected to the body's immune system through this area too. I mean, this is like so vitally important. So what you're doing is helping people to, you kind of, okay, you know what, let's do it this way. Let's talk about the different areas, and then let's talk about maybe have a look. We'll talk about some of the different areas, and then what would be a typical kind of example of how you would help a patient. So we'll create a scenario. You can give us one from your practice, someone that would give us a good example. Okay, I love that. So now let's talk a little bit about I'm just going to flip through the chapters because I love how you've laid them out and they make so much sense. So now you talk about depression, probiotics, omega-3s, and the Mediterranean eating pattern in chapter 2. So I know there's so much debate about that and about the Mediterranean diet being absolutely fantastic. We all know we need probiotics. We know we need omega-3s, and you've got it under depression. I like that. I like how you've categorized things like that. So take it away.
Absolutely. So I find that when people are, especially now in the far northeast where I am, now we're heading towards spring, but the earlier months were quite dark. People suffer with seasonal affective disorder, or what I like to, people feel blue. They just don't feel good. That's where food can be super important. Things like vitamin D, the largest amount of vitamin D we get just by outdoor sunlight. 10 to 15 minutes of outdoor sunlight will do your body good. That's where we get 80% of our vitamin D. But you can also fortify that with the foods you eat, especially if you live in certain areas where you are exposed to less light. But as you said, there's a lot of thoughts about the Mediterranean diet. This is what I feel about it. I feel that one of the things the Mediterranean diet is it reminds us that eating those vegetables, the fruit in mental health, I like to speak mostly about lower glycemic fruit like berries, because they are super rich in antioxidants and they're low glycemic. So if someone is struggling a little bit with weight, say they've taken other medications or they're not exercising because they're just not feeling good, it's one way to still have the fiber nutrients from fruit, but not go with, say, the high glycemic fruit until perhaps the metabolic health improves. Because we're understanding that 88% of Americans now have poor metabolic health of some kind. And what that is telling us is that in a situation like COVID and a pandemic, predisposing conditions are actually making us sicker. So I feel it's just important, and one easy tweaks that we can make is to start eating healthier to lower the statistics around our metabolic health. And that's where little tweaks like the types of fruit we eat, if we are concerned about our weight, or we have a propensity for insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes. So all of that becomes important. So Mediterranean diet offers us some great principles. Is it the only way? No. Absolutely not. I think there are many, many ways to incorporate good food. So what I prefer to do is use things like prebiotics, probiotics, other fiber-rich foods, the B vitamin foods, vitamin D-rich foods, several others, but then, elements of different diets which might be more personalized for someone who's coming in to see me.
Even though you talk in general about the book, you obviously do it as a individual treatment plan.
Exactly. So, for example, I had a young woman pre-COVID who was about 28 years old, and she came in referred by her gastroenterologist. And basically, she was very panicked. She came in asking me for medication called Zoloft. And, often people will ask you for something, and I'm always open to a discussion. But as a nutritional psychiatrist, I like to explore further as to, before I pull out that prescription pad, really, let's look at what you might need. And we we discovered that she actually didn't need a medication. About 18 months before she came to see me, she'd gotten a promotion at work. And from being a young woman who, had meals at home, went to her gym several times a week, she was suddenly had all this sort of great lifestyle where she was flying every other day in cities, going for business meetings. And what it did is it disrupted her regular schedule. So she was eating in airports, eating fast foods, eating junk foods that she hadn't been doing before. Eating snacks out of the bar fridge when she arrived late at night at a hotel, going to more business meetings. She might have usually had a glass of wine at dinner on a Friday night. Now she was having 2 glasses almost every other night, because every time she arrived somewhere, she was networking. And so what was good for her career was also ruining her health. And she realized that when we put it together. And she wanted to avoid a medication, and she was able to. She was functioning and was very anxious, but we were able to slowly tweak her diet over time. Because what had happened is her gut was incredibly inflamed, and she had developed what we call dysbiosis, which is when those I just like to say, the bad bugs overcome the good bugs and cause disruption. And other people called it leaky gut. And as we worked with her to just eat healthier, built in, where could she shop when she went somewhere? Could she take some snacks with her? So she wasn't buying chips and pretzels in the airport. What could she do differently? How could she cut back on even the glass of wine she was having? What could she do to really improve her gut healing? And over about 4 months, she was much improved. And she didn't need a medication. She exercised more. She learned she learned a meditation on an app, just how to center herself, use sounds, use words that were grounding. And so we went in many different directions. But the staple thing was we helped rework her diet. And she was a great example of how we need to think more out of the box when it comes to someone presenting in a certain way to a doctor, a clinician, or...
This is very important what you've just said, because we're so conditioned in this current society, in this current environment, that the minute you feel out of sorts emotionally, depression, anxiety, it's quick, get to the primary care physician. 95% of prescriptions are coming from the primary care physician.
Yes.
So it's so fortunate that this lady landed up in your hands, because if she had just gone straight to the primary care physician, there's a good chance she would have gone on Zoloft, which we know would have had a whole bunch of side effects. I mean, there's 14-page, nearly 14-page informed consent talking about all the potential side effects. Yes. And you avoided that, and you actually then reconditioned her whole gut and her whole mind, and helped her to see that change of diet was contributing. Obviously, the whole lifestyle change was contributing too. So I love that. And I think it's that holistic context that we need to look at the whole person's narrative. And that's what's so missing in the quick fix mentality of today. And you're not offering that. What you're offering is, let's look at your lifestyle. Let's look at the context of your life. What's changed? What's happening? What are you doing? And from the research that I've done, my most recent clinical trials, of the work that I did, the narrative's the most important, because that gives you the big picture. So I'm so pleased you gave that example.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. When you mentioned, we happen to use Zoloft as an example here, one of the things that's troubling me deeply about the pandemic is I think that we're attending to many things. We are doing what we need to do to move our lives forward. But we are not, and this is something I know I've heard you talk about, we are missing the mental health picture in all of this, because people may not be talking about it, just not feeling good. I'm not talking about a diagnosis, just not feeling good. Just, feeling so anxious, sleeping poorly, being traumatized by either losing a family member, or just, going through the illness, to the extent that there were new prescriptions for Zoloft and for sleep and for anxiety last year were on the rise for new individuals who had not taken it before. Speaking to that point, that I think, when you appear in a panic state, I think that many physicians will reach for the prescription pad first. It's also sometimes the expectation of the person going in is, I need help and I want that, because that's happened to me in my practice. But the other thing is that Zoloft went on shortage during June of last year in the country, in the United States. So speaking to the fact that there were so many new prescriptions, and I feel like we have to find our way back from there. And one way to do that is certainly the work that you do, and people reading your book and really understanding how can we work ourselves back from these conditions, and also using nutrition. These are things that are within our power. Oh,
I think that's brilliant, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because it is like that. It does worry me that they're going on about the next pandemic is mental health, as though mental health is on the rise. Meanwhile, it's not like there's some illness that's, they lump it in with the pandemic as though the pandemic is unknown, and then they say mental health is this unknown, and it's such a false narrative, because the fact is that from the beginning of time, mankind has battled with their mind. It's just, being a human is hard to live. It's not like this is and every generation faces something different. And this, COVID is a huge, so if someone's, as you said, lost a loved one, in a financial situation, in isolation, obviously they're depressed and sad. It's a normal response to an adverse circumstance. It's a normal response. Yeah, but they want to come in, as you quite rightly said, Dr. Umas, they want to come in the mental health system and label and diagnose and increase medication, which they have been. That's not the solution. That's just going to make things worse, which is what we've seen happening over the past 40 years.
I mean, one of the reasons that one element of our poor metabolic health is some of those medications, because they cause weight gain, or they happen to impact your glucose intolerance. So
and
I
cardiovascular
think that,
and neurological. Some of them have up to 1,400 side effects, and people are not being told that. They're not being told about how hard they are to wean off and all that kind of stuff. And that creates a whole new problem, and people feel worse about themselves. Yeah.
It's complicated. People feel worse. They don't. And studies have shown that, for example, sometimes there's only about 50% of remission when you take a medication. And so it's a complicated thing, because if we're not, it's always been there, like you said, Dr. Leaf. People struggle with how they were feeling emotionally for eternity, till the beginning of time. And most of it is, there's so much stigma associated with it. It's, how do we find our way back? How do we just find a way to feel better, to get the help that we need, whatever that might be? But I think that using, the techniques that you teach people, using, nutrition through their mental health, using a holistic approach, just thinking, what can I do better? Can I sleep better? Can I be drinking more water? Can I get up and I'm a big coffee fan. Can I have that coffee in the morning? Can I, cut back on other things that I'm maybe, splurging on a little bit during the pandemic, like processed food sales were on the rise at the beginning of the pandemic. And baking was on the rise because people were seeking comfort. So I think that it's a year later now, and we need to find our way back to eating the whole orange and skipping the store-bought orange juice, as I say.
I love that. Eat the whole orange, because you can't eat a whole bag of whole oranges, but if you drink the processed orange juice, you're literally drinking a whole bag, which, so it's out of context, you overdo it. So it's to teach people those principles of
overdo it, and the added sugars, that's right.
Yeah.
And then the
insulin, and then the depression, and because you're going to have that impact on your brain. So nutrition's a very, very it's a very quick response one gets from changing nutrition in terms of mental health. Do you find that? It's pretty, not that I'm saying quick fix, but I mean, once you start adjusting a diet, if you're on a highly processed diet, like that example you gave of your patient, switching from a fairly balanced diet to a very high processed, there was an immediate mood change. And I know in the list of addictions,
there was an immediate improvement.
Big improvement in terms of how, and it was quite fast.
It was absolutely. So there are, I think the gut healing takes a bit longer, but people start to feel so empowered by the fact that they absolutely start to feel. I have patients within a week say, what else can I be doing? Because I've learned through my own practice and the protocols that I've developed that people can start small and then build up habits, or build up changes, I should say. But here's the thing, when they have a list of 10 things to do, they can't, it's too overwhelming for themselves. It's too many, but they can start small and build up. And they'll call within a few days, I want to do more because I'm already feeling, I'm sleeping better, or I'm feeling lighter when I'm eating a certain way. And it's absolutely true. It's very, very powerful. And I think that it makes people feel autonomous, like they can do something. It's not, just going and getting that quick fix or whatever it is, that they can feel empowered, and that they can find their way back to health. And it's sort of being patient with themselves and accepting that these things happen with consistency, right? If you don't practice the things that you talk about in the book, they don't happen. You've got to work on it.
You got to keep working on it. But you're offering people an alternative through something that's so natural. We eat. So you're saying, hey, let's take what you eat and let's make it work for you. So that's just beautiful. Now, supplementation, I know there's lots of other things, but how do you feel about supplementation? Do you also use that in your approach?
I do. And my approach evolved on supplementation, because initially I would be very, and I've even written articles where I've said, our diet really should be the basis. And it's true, it should. But we don't live in a perfect world. Where we have the standard American diet, which is called the SAD diet for a good reason, there are many nutrition gaps that even as we are each trying to make healthier changes, that there are still nutrition gaps. And so for that reason, I think there's a place for supplementation. And I think that, for example, omega-3s are a good supplement. You can get it through seafood, fatty fish, you can get it through plant-based sources, but you can also take a supplement. And there are both, fish oil supplements available, as well as vegan supplements, algal oil available. So that's a good example. Another one for people to know is that saffron, the spice, has a lot of good evidence in clinical trials of depression. But as you know, Dr. Leaf, you only use a few strands and it's very expensive. You don't eat a ton of it. And it's really, if you look at the dosing in the studies, that's a good example of when you could get a supplement. And the Amen clinics have a great supplement for saffron, which I will ask people to get if they really want to boost everything else that they're doing with food. So those are a couple of examples. Vitamin D in the far northeast, many of us are deficient. So it might actually just become important to check with your doctor, get the blood test, and just supplement that, and then boost what you're doing with food as well. So there's a way in which they can work complementary. They can be complementary.
You said something very, very important there. Don't just go to the local Whole Foods or whole shop or vitamin shop or something and just buy what you think, just, okay, I'm going to load up with all those things. You have to do the blood work, because if you're taking what you don't need, and I know for a fact that if you're short of vitamin D and you don't have enough, it's not going to help. But if you don't need vitamin D and you take a whole lot, it's going to be a problem. People automatically think like vitamin C, you can just go and take a whole lot and you'll be fine. If you take too much, it's actually dangerous. So thank you for saying that. Don't just go and supplement. Really make sure that you do it based on blood work that your body needs. So important.
And you might well be deficient. You might well be deficient, but check first.
Check first. Don't just go self-supplement. Yeah, that's so good. Okay, I want to talk about, I love the fact that the anxiety, fermented foods, dietary fiber, and the tryptophan myth. Let's talk a little bit about that. Because anxiety, people use anxiety, as we know, people use depression and anxiety as though they're it's, but meanwhile they're warning signals. But if you're feeling anxious, there's obviously something going on. But because you're in your mind and your life and experience, but there's also your brain and body that needs to be looked after. So that's very important that nutrition can help us with anxiety. But you talk about the tryptophan myth, dietary fiber, and fermented foods. So let's talk about that.
Absolutely. So absolutely. So, the stress that we're experiencing in the here and now, it's something that we can certainly work in a holistic way, but we can also change what we're eating. This is where I think it becomes super important for people to know the stuff that they should be avoiding, because the added and refined sugars, the junk foods, processed foods, ultra-processed foods have preservatives, dyes, colorants, stabilizers, preservatives, as well as artificial sweeteners. There are many of them that actually, all of that group, processed vegetable oils, which are the cheaper oils often used in fast food outlets, those disrupt our mental health. Added and refined sugars have been shown to worsen anxiety. So it's not, just that it's bad for your metabolic health. Yes, it is, but it worsens your anxiety. So it's important for people to say they think they're having too much sugar in their diet. Don't just switch to an artificial. Don't go from a soda to a diet soda because the artificial sweetener could worsen your anxiety. So it's these little things that are important to know about. But then, on the positive side, the two big food groups that are super helpful in anxiety. One is fiber is your friend. And fiber is your friend because think of a complex carbohydrate that breaks down slowly in your body. Your insulin doesn't spike. You have a bowl of chia pudding for breakfast or as a snack, or an oatmeal, something like that, that's filling and is not going to just cause these spikes. And that's the difference, because the sugary donuts that, somewhere in the world, we forgot in the United States that dessert became breakfast, because in many countries like the United Kingdom, donut is something you have at high tea, but here we have them for breakfast. So I always think that's really funny. But that's a great example. If you eat it, you may feel good immediately, but for the longer term, it's actually damaging to your brain. So understanding that becomes important. So fiber-rich foods, great for your gut microbes, nurtures them, helps your immunity, helps your sleep, helps so many things in terms of including those. And where do you get them from? Vegetables, fruit, beans, nuts, seeds, healthy whole grains, lentils, things like that. So just include some of those if you eat them in your diet. And then fermented foods are basically bringing back live active cultures. It's like bringing back more friendly bugs to your microbes to your gut. And you need that. So people who eat dairy, there are actually now non-dairy forms of yogurts that have probiotics in them or have live active cultures. And I just say get the unfruited ones, because even though blueberries are tasty or healthy, you shouldn't get the fruited kind, because they can have 6 to 8 teaspoons of added sugar. So just buy the plain and add your blueberries. That's the issue. And then other fermented foods are things like kombucha, kefir, miso, tempeh, many things that you can add to your diet that actually will help your anxiety over time. So just bringing them in will quell anxiety. And my other big favorite for anxiety is really to incorporate things like turmeric. It's available as a supplement, but a quarter teaspoon with a pinch of black pepper to soup, a smoothie, or a tea if you don't cook with it. If you cook with it in a stir fry or something like that, could be very helpful to just start bringing back in, because it has anti-inflammatory, antioxidant properties. It quells anxiety. So it's a good one to add to the mix. And then the power of calming teas. People underrate the fact that green tea, flower, lavender, all of these can be chamomile, can be very calming for the body. So, if you're feeling that level of anxiety, then maybe incorporate more tea into your diet. And that in itself can be just help you over time.
Love that. That's wonderful. Very, very good advice. If you consider the fact that the gut also secretes a natural benzodiazepine, and if you eat the proper foods like you've described, you actually allow your gut to release that and to release the serotonin. So our natural pharmacopoeia is activated by eating a diet that's brain and body friendly. And then you start getting and then over time, instead of adding something in that's a chemical that has other side effects, you can train your body to release what you need, which is, it's the hard work though. Yes, you get that immediate effect not immediate, but you do feel because diet's so quick, because you're eating all the time, there is that impact. But it does take time, as you also said, to make those changes, and people need to stick with that. And that's the problem in today's fast world, this quick fix mentality. Fixing your diet, your nutrition, your mental health, your nutrition is a process.
It's a process, and one that you have to be committed to, and one that you have to be patient with yourself around, because you will, I promise you will feel better, but at the same time, it might take a little bit of time. But I also think we also are a little impatient in our attitudes towards getting healthy and getting better.
Well, it is, because the advertisements say you're feeling sad, get this medication, tell your doctor to give you some Zoloft, and now it's all going to go away. And then they have pictures of people, happy people jumping all over the place,
smiling.
And then there's 1,000
people
side
don't
effects.
realize,
No, they don't read the 1,000 side effects underneath that are in tiny fine print, that actually there's a boomerang effect. So it's so much better to approach your mental health in a very holistic way. So I'm very grateful for this information. Let's talk about insomnia, because people battle so much with sleep. And you've mentioned already chamomile. You've got a couple of examples to help with insomnia.
Absolutely. So my two tips for insomnia are, one tip is flip your breakfast. And I say that because there are foods like eggs, which contain melatonin, there's certain veggies that contain melatonin. So I say, if you're struggling a little bit with sleep, have that omelet in the evening. Have it with a salad, just do it differently, because those are melatonin-rich foods. And that's one way to approach it. And the other one is tart cherries, which until I did my research way back and started to incorporate this with patients, it's actually helps people sleep. And in certain parts of the country, you can get it at natural food stores. I'm wary of the ones that people might get online just because you want to look at the added sugar, but you can get it in natural food stores. Some parts of the country you can buy tart cherries, and other parts you can get them frozen. So include that as a snack, because they have a very soothing effect for sleep, and it could be a nighttime snack that you have. Or if you get the juice, you can always sip that at night.
I love that. That's great. That's fantastic advice. Let's just touch on very briefly on PTSD and ADHD. Now, once again, I want to just remind everyone, we're not talking about labels as it. So PTSD is not an it, nor is ADHD and it, nor is dementia and anxiety. These are symptoms that something's going on. So if you have had a trauma, then post-traumatic stress is very normal response, but you can help manage that with diet. So I just wanted to say that and remind everyone, when we throw out these labels, that we're not putting people in categories. We just say that these are human responses, these are warning signals, but you can manage those symptoms with diet. So what would be some examples that you would advise if someone had gone through a major stress and came to you and were really having battling with flashbacks and the pain in their body and the shock and all that kind of thing? How would you help someone like that?
So some of the foods that I recommend are blueberries. I go back to them. They're rich in anthocyanins. A quarter cup to a half a cup is great for your body and brain, anti-inflammatory effects. Omega-3 fatty acids, which you could get in fatty fish like wild-caught salmon, mackerel, sardines, or vegetarian vegan sources are chia seeds, flax seeds, which you can add to your diet as well. Turmeric also plays a role in helping with symptoms of PTSD or stress. I'd like to call it, Dr. DRLEAF, almost stress during the pandemic, because someone has been traumatized in some way during this process of the pandemic, besides everything else in our lives, right? So I think incorporating those are great. With ADHD, I will point out that some of the studies show that eating breakfast is very important, because there's something about, I know there's a lot about different types of fasting going on. Again, you have to discuss it with your doctor, but in ADHD, it turned out that was really important. And for those people who do take medications for ADHD, it tends to suppress the appetite. So it's extremely important to eat breakfast, because it helps your focus during the day. And then polyphenols from things like berries and cherries and eggplant, different things like onions, green tea are super important to help with focus, as well as B vitamins and the C vitamins and minerals that you can add in through foods in your diet. In chapter 11, I have foods with the different minerals that you can watch add to your diet. Things with zinc, potassium, and magnesium actually are foods that you should embrace. So, I think that becomes important in ADHD. And the other thing is avoiding foods with the added colorants, dyes, and sort of the junk foods, or the added and refined sugars. Any parent will tell you at a birthday party that, children will suffer after they eat all the sweet stuff and be lacking focus, to say the least. So.
Exactly. It makes me happy to hear a psychiatrist, having worked for so many years in clinical practice with neurologists and psychiatrists that were whacking these kids onto these drugs, not looking at their diet, not looking at their exercise. And I'd be sitting there, they'd come to me and I'd be taking them off the meds and getting them onto just asking them a few questions about what are you feeding them? What are you eating? And you just go around some of the schools. When I worked in schools, I mean, the kids are being fed at lunchtime from the school. I mean, this is just not, these are not brain foods. These are foods that will create symptoms, the symptoms of ADHD, as opposed to, and then these kids get labeled and then get medicated when actually what they needed was a dietary change and more movement in their diet. So I'm very grateful for psychiatrists like you yourself that are teaching people how to approach this in a more holistic way. It's so vitally important. So I want to thank you for your great work, and thank you for spending the time with me today. And we've been talking about this wonderful book. This is Your Brain on Food. And where can people get your book and find out more about you?
Absolutely. Please follow me on social at Dr. Uma Naidoo, which is at DRUMANAIDOO. But please subscribe to my website where you'll get tons of new information all the time. And that's umanaidoomd.com. And I would love to hear from people. So thank you. And thank you for hosting me. It's always lovely to talk with you.
It's lovely to talk with you as well. We have so much that we share in common when it comes to mental health, having a holistic approach and helping people to get that autonomy back. That's really one of my favorite things, is that agency. I have a whole path to empowerment that I have done research on, and eating is such a great way, as you said. I loved how you said that earlier on, that it's such a great way of helping people feel empowered, because you can say, try this, and then they do it and they're in control, and then that works, and then you can give them the next thing. So it's a tremendous way of helping people to self-regulate and get that sense of agency back. So I really love your approach, and I want to thank you for joining me today and for your pearls of wisdom. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. My pleasure, Dr. Leaf. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you again next time.